Welcome back. As mentioned in my video about Bernie Sanders, there are currently two groups that are allegedly trying to take the Democratic Party out of its stalemate. One of them is Leaders We Deserve, led by David Koch, which tries to persuade us to vote for them in the upcoming Democratic primaries just because they are young, not platform, just that. They are young, and that should be enough reason to vote for them. Hopefully, they will mature and give voters a much better reason in the near future. It was sad last Friday when David Koch appeared in real time with Bill Maher. Even though Bill Maher tried to push him to give a reason why we should vote for them, in the end, the reason was that we should vote for them because they are young and no platform. Or just evasive lines like that we should give voters a reason to vote for Democrats. And I agree. The matter is that you have to give them the reason, not just to say that they need a reason to vote for Democrats. So give them the reason. Anyway, the other is Rebellion PAC, led by Jane Yugur, and they at least have a platform. Indeed, they show promise. Yet some improvements have to be made if this PAC is going to overcome the levels of bad poetry. Number one, John Saller, the author of The Nature and Origins of Mass Opinion, the best book about public opinion I have read, always recommended going for the most salient issue, and I agree. Actually, he gives numerous examples in his book. So, considering that the top issue right now is economic uncertainty, not which could be translated as not knowing if you will be able to make ends meet next month. Economic uncertainty that not only comes from a different source than in the Biden times, which in the Biden times was inflation, but also that it's a volatility that is coming at a much higher level. Considering that, I would like to propose not to modify the platform because that could invite many reactions. I know how bad a strategy. I know how bad strategists love their bad poetry, but to reframe its connotations. So, they have excuse me, they have six basic lines in their platform. So the first one, a $15 minimum wage. A $15 minimum wage is not the most salient issue right now, but better life or better wages or a more certain future or something that allows them to connect this line to the most salient issue could be an improvement. This should not be just an attempt at misdirecting the voter, of course. In other words, better life or better wages can be sold as a label that preaches better purchasing power free of inflation and the uncertainty threatening income as a result of Trump tariffs that could end up in a pink slip in a moment in which prices will rise because of tariffs and interest rates are still probably at 25% for anybody in the working class. Therefore, this level, whether the ones I have proposed or any other, should be able to imply to allow people to allow voters connect the dots and make the following connotations: stable conditions, free of uncertainty that leaves workers in fear of price increases that make the most basic items too expensive due to tariffs, and then also in the case of housing and food, of deportations. Free of the uncertainty coming from their precarious income due to the threat of disruptions to the supply chain that end up in pink slips, as I said. So you have to connect that to your label. Your label, as any brand, should imply all these situations and their respective solutions. Also, your brand in this letter A should imply fair conditions, like easier conditions for unionization, which includes pro-check, because it's not secret that big companies invest money to make much more difficult for workers to be part of a union, and more accessible mechanisms to enforce labor law protections, in which Trump's recent policies can be of help, because he has make the National Labor Relations Board another good thing created by FDR, too weak to enforce anything. So your brand have also to include this second item. And also, finally, on this item, your brand has to include a $15 minimum wage adjusted to inflation, in combination with an additional earned income credit for those employed by the small business. So you can exempt small businesses from the minimum wage. This would be an improved version. So this is nothing but an improved version of the size and Zuckman proposal that was ignored during the Biden era, when Biden was when the left, led by Bernie, was pushing for a minimum wage improvement. This way, you would be connecting the $15 minimum wage to the salient issue, which is still uncertainty, and making it part of a block that is more or a block or a brand that is more appealing for the majority of the working class. Besides, even if you can index non-union wages to inflation, that would be an additional incentive for unionization, especially in the service sector, an incentive that characterize, we must repeat again, the New Deal, the incentive to unionization, to collective bargaining. Then let's move to the second item in Rebellion PAC's platform is allowing Medicaid and Medicare to negotiate drug prices. This is important, but recent events have made the arbitrary denial of coverage more salient than the drug prices. And as many people suffer, are affected by these abusive drug prices, as those who have to face arbitrariness by insurance companies and hospitals, exorbitant prices, extremely arbitrary prices, who may be very, very different from one patient to another for the same treatment in the same hospital. So it'd be better to present to it would be better to present the proposal as a more comprehensive amendment of the Affordable Care Act. You come with a label, a brand for a robust public option that can, together with Medicaid and Medicare, not only negotiate prices with pharmaceuticals, but also tackle the other imperfections of our healthcare system. That way, the working class, if you succeed, won't feel betrayed when they discover that those still covered by private insurance are still affected by hospital and coverage issues, insurance coverage issues. And even if the parts I am proposing to be added, only help you with more tools for negotiation, let's admit they are very powerful lobbies. You can present the outcome as an incremental improvement over the status quo. So your label also have to convince the voter to make that connection between your brand and this product. Don't forget that the main obstacle that both Obamacare and Medicare faced was at the level of public opinion. It was that most people like the health insurance they get from their employers. And that's an unavoidable uphill battle you have to win, as FDR won the battle against isolationism starting in 1940 in order to help England contain Nazism. So sometimes you have to lead, you have to educate and lead the public opinion in the opposite direction. And for that, you have plenty of cases of people who have suffered arbitrariness by insurance companies whose coverage has been ignored, of price hospitals that are irrational and, as I said, different from different, even the same hospital for the same condition. So you have plenty of narratives to sell your policy, but don't limit it to a fraction of the problem. Then the third item in the Rebellion PAC platform is a ban on private equity firms to invest in housing. These equity firms, they indeed engage in abusive practices. Yet the numbers don't show that they are the top reason for our 4 million gap in housing supply, because this is the main reason that keeps this with interest rates, is the main reason of the excessive prices of in housing we have experienced for a long time. And the top reason for this gaps in the supply is the what is called the NIMBYism, the not in my backyard uh, stance that is very entrenched in many sectors of the middle class. So you have to tie that ban to a consolidation of permitting at the federal level for up to 4 million units, like the consolidation in permitted proposed by the Brookings Institute to solve the problem with the grid. This also would allow reintroducing competitiveness in this market, as this competitiveness was lost to the top 10 companies in that industry after the Great Recession and the pandemic. This would also prevent the disappointment that would follow if that ban, if you get away with that ban and the benefit is only marginal. It's a marginal improvement to which the working class have to resign just because somebody in the left decided that going after private equity firms was the issue that has to spearhead their policy on that field. So I'm not saying that you ignore it. Like in the first item, I am just saying that your first message has to be spearheaded by the salient issue that is the gap in supply, and also may include the private equity firms, but realize that that's not the main cause, and a victory on that front may end up resulting disappointing if it's only if it only has a marginal result. The fourth issue in their platform is no more wars. Wars are a salient issue, not as salient as uncertainty in the economy, but it is a salient, but not good unless no, it's not a good proposal unless you oppose all wars that are against national interests, not all wars anyway at all costs. Don't forget that FDR fought isolationism since the late 30s and helped England, did everything, stretched the law to help England against Hitler since early in 1940, while Neville Chamberlain and some in the American Congress naively opposed war at all costs in 1938, only to get a more bloody war in 1939, which brings us to the case of Ukraine. I do believe that we are before the same scenario. The allies bullying Zelensky into making concessions to Putin are equivalent to the allies who bullied Czechoslovakia to cede the Sudetenland to Hitler in 1938, because you can make clear parallels between Hitler and Putin, especially when it comes to how addicted their economies are to their war machines. Worse, in this case, as good part of the fault of of the slow progress in Ukraine is Biden's fault, who, following Jake Sullivan's stupid ideas that to fail to create a sound Ukraine narrative, led to and adopted a and absurd gradualism made the war longer and more expensive and more appealing to the American public. So, oppose war? Sure, I also oppose war. But you cannot oppose wars when it comes that when this comes against the national interest, and it's against the national interest to strengthen Putin and risk an even bigger war where the enemy is not just Russia, but Russia plus China. Russia with its huge capacity to produce weapons, with China's economic support, being China the second world economy. That is plainly stupid, and you should make clear that you are not going you don't look like a confused teenager that writes bad poetry. The fifth item is family leave, which is something that I support, but is something that I would include in the better life or better wages brand. Remember that the fact that an issue polls well doesn't mean that it's silent. Otherwise, even if you succeed, it may follow the same fate as the additional child tax credit, which when it expired, because Republicans denied their votes, it died without major working class protest. It's not that the working class hated those Republicans and punished them with their votes. No, nobody went for the additional child tax credit when it expired. So remember that it must be tied to the most salient issue. And salient issue not for a group of cool activists that have destroyed issues like immigration and transsexual rights, but appealing for to the working class, and you have plenty of studies by Pew Research to inquire what those priorities of the working class are. Then the sixth item in Rebellion PAC's platform is money out of politics. And this is something I do support 100%. By like democracy, it doesn't win elections. The way I tackle this issue is by connecting it to the most salient issue. And you do that by connecting it to the specific brands that are part of your platform, which of course should be part of a coherent proposal centered on that salient issue. That way you build momentum. So you tie it to every single time you are selling the other five brands of your platform, and you build momentum. So at one moment there will be plenty of people connecting their grievances to money on politics to make your final push for campaign finance reform possible. In other words, you must make explicit that the reason we have to fight for each one of these improvements in the working class is because money in politics lobbyists have conspired in the past to deprive them of such betterments. In fact, some time ago, I proposed a government waste and upgrade commission to redefine government with an FDR JFK narrative. And part of its mission would be to bring visibility on the efforts of lobbyists lobbyists that create loopholes in well-intended legislation. Actually, this is what happened to the Volcker rule, to the global minimum tax, and to the corporate minimum tax, all of which have been plagued by loopholes that have diminished their effects significantly. And those efforts could perfectly play in the role of making the ousting of money from politics more salient. Finally, you may say correctly to a point that introducing phrases like stability or better life or better wages, brands like this complicates the message. That your message is as it is more simple. True, but it also makes it look harrowingly incomplete. For instance, on healthcare, if you speak to those who can afford pharmaceutical drugs and don't mention those who are arbitrarily denied coverage or arbitrarily charged in hospitals incredible bills, you may look detached from reality or sophomoric because you don't seem to understand the issue. Adding the other two items wouldn't distract voters and will call the attention of those who have suffered from these other two issues, other than drug prices. Likewise, when you are talking about the better life label, employment stability and better wages, you may include two other items which are minimum wage, family paid leave, the other two items in the Rebellion PAC's platform, and without introducing distractions, unless you add, in other words, you would not be introducing distractions by adding two additional products under your brand, unless you want, of course, to add a long laundry list of demands that would dilute the concept of your brand. So as long as it's limited to a very small number of items, it should not complicate your main brand. Then something I didn't find in their page in the Rebellion PAC's webpage is a more detailed take on each issue. For instance, the nuance I introduced in the case of the minimum wage proposal is otherwise you are not proposing a platform. You are just showing a wish list. It doesn't have to have all the intricacies that a bill has, but it has to transmit the idea that you know what you are talking about, that your proposal is not the poem of a confused teenager. And having said that, I'll leave you with our newscast.
Good evening. This is Brian Thomas Simons, and these are the main headlines of this hour. Among other news,
New 266 executive decisions were released in the Oval Office during the weekend. Among them, 1. State Secretary Lil Marco will be appointed National Security Advisor in place of Michael Waltz. Secretary Lil Marco will perform the duties associated with both positions simultaneously. 2. State Secretary Lil Marco will also be appointed the new EPA Administrator in place of Lee Zeldin. Secretary Lil Marco will perform the duties associated with the three positions simultaneously. Visibly emotional, Secretary Rubio thanked President Trump for the appointments. Likewise, he declared that he was flattered to be taken into consideration to also replace current Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth and that he still has not received permission to return from the Maldives. 3. State Secretary Lil Marcos' mission in the Maldives extended until 2026. 4. From now on, President's Day will be moved to June 14, the day of his birthday, and renamed as America's Day. B. UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer and Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick engaged in a feisty dispute about who was Trump's best adulator as they were leaving the Oval Office after a to-be UK trade deal was announced. Arguing about who had said the best dithyramb, Prime Minister Starmer declared that 1. President Trump was his hero and Winston Churchill was a lightweight by comparison. That both Churchill's and Roosevelt's roles in World War II were definitely overrated. 2. That he had an ode he had written himself, where he declares his secret wish of one day being considered worthy of Trump's love, and then proceeded to read it for the press. 3. He was willing to surrender Zelensky, MERS, and even his own wife and mother to the Kremlin if President Trump demanded from him such proof of love. On the other hand, Secretary Lutnick declared that 1. Trump was the best president of the United States, of the world, and of the universe. Take that, George Washington. 2. That he had a tattoo portraying Trump as Rambo on his right buttock and pulled down his pants to prove it. 3. A secret letter where he expresses his wish to become the president's slave, preferably a sex slave, the day Trump decided so. C. U.S. Attorney General Pam Bondi denounced British Prime Minister Starmer and Commerce Secretary Lutnick for machismo and misogyny after the aforementioned excluded her from the dispute about who was President Trump's best adulator. Demanding a chance to show that only she could demean herself, she declared that 1. President Trump had saved 250 million lives in the United States, but over 9 billion people worldwide in over 200 countries. 2. Trump University, which she decided not to prosecute after receiving a $25,000 campaign donation, should take over Harvard as homage to President Trump's genius. 3. The Supreme Court should apologize to President Trump for not approving of his disregard for court decisions and the rule of law. Who do they believe they are to judge him? She wondered rhetorically. 4. She and her husband have a large poster of President Trump in their bedroom, precisely over their headboard, which her husband, with special devotion, uses for inspiration. 5. Secretary Lutnick stole her line about Trump being the best president of the United States, of the world, and of the whole universe. D. After the Washington Post disputed some of Navarro and Lutnick's assertions, the tariff czar and the Commerce Secretary decided to respond. In their own words, 1. The Washington Post maliciously declares that the jobs of the future, which will come back to America thanks to President Trump's tariffs, will most probably be made by robots, not workers. This reveals profound ignorance as, in alternative facts, both can be true. 2. When Donald Trump said we've got $5 trillion of factories coming to America in 4 years, what he actually meant was $5 trillion per year. But that will always be tetradimensional chess for the likes of the Washington Post because they forget that when you use alternative facts, you have to suspend reality, like in the movies. 3. We have a $1.2 trillion trade deficit. If we cut that 25%, that's 1% of GDP growth in America. $300 billion grows America 1% for the rest of our lives. But because stopping imports would crash our economy, President Biden will get those bad countries to send us their staff for free. That way, they won't have to pay tariffs. 4. The $5 trillion tax cut championed by the president will benefit mostly the working class because as soon as the top 1% receives it, they will have to redistribute it to the working class. That way, we save on distribution costs, and with that, we can eliminate the fiscal deficit. What part of that Mr. Kessler and Mr. Lynch can't understand? 5. Mr. Kessler and Mr. Lynch mocked our statement that the Lutnick-Navarro would bring God's kingdom to earth, and even somebody called me Secretary Lunatic, but that's because they don't believe. Let's see how good their sense of humor is when we send them to Soco in El Salvador to join Paul Krugman. New scandal in Argentina shakes President Milei's presidency. A new scandal, which has even devolved into fistfights in the Argentinian Congress, is hurting President Milei as he tries to show enough stability to convince the IMF to sign a new extended credit facility, name the IMF uses for loans destined to cover long-term balance of payment needs, the 23rd in the case of Argentina. And though the session was supposed to deal with the crypto scandal that involved Milei weeks ago, it was later revealed that just a few congressmen from La Libertad Avanza, the president's party, had learned of the agenda and instead believed that a new talk show was scouting for guests for upcoming episodes. The IMF expressed its concern about the incident, and that if the Casa Rosada couldn't give satisfaction to President Modi for India's grievances regarding the Argentinian YouTuber Terminester, the signing of the long-term loan might be at risk, which would force Milei to a drastic devaluation of the peso. Just hours after the IMF expressed concern about the session of the Argentinian Congress that was going to debate the crypto scandal affecting President Milei, more damaging news was revealed by the newspaper Clarín. The new scandal involved a company dedicated to tourism packages in Gaza and Sudan that had obtained the president's endorsement at a private event for the tiny amount of $500. The same amount President Milei received for each of his 2 tweets endorsing the dollar Libra meme coin. Currently, the Peronists are investigating other possible scandals. 1. Milei appearing in infomercials endorsing products in exchange for free samples. 2. Milei demanding that visitors to Casa Rosada buy lottery tickets sponsored by his party, La Libertad Avanza. 3. Milei supplying scalpers with tickets to Lali Esposito's concerts during the night and selling dollars during the day. 4. Milei charging $50 to Argentinian media and $150 to international media for interviews and photographs taken with him. An IMF representative declared that the tiny amount charged for the dollar Libra tweets showed that President Milei didn't know how to steal, especially in crypto, where other presidents have at least charged $2 million per tweet, and that if these instances of President Milei selling himself for coins were confirmed, the 23rd IMF loan was out of the question. It's heartbreaking that Argentinian kids will be shunned by Papa Noel this Christmas. But if these accusations against President Milei prosper, we'll have no other choice, added the IMF functionary. President Trump convokes Secretary Rubio to the White House to appoint him interim defense secretary. Secretary Rubio returned briefly from the Maldives to receive a new token of appreciation from President Trump, who appointed him interim defense secretary, just in case the current secretary is forced to resign. Also, in recognition of his loyalty, he was awarded 3 more medals. This makes a total of 12 medals Marco Rubio has been granted by the president. Rubio will perform his duties as State Department Secretary, National Security Advisor, EPA Administrator, and Interim Defense Secretary from the Maldives, and it will be his duty to intervene decisively via secure lines whenever the president allows him to make decisions on matters related to those departments. One day, I will be able to return to the United States in my beloved state of Florida, and I will have more time to express my gratitude to President Trump, who, due to his multiple occupations, has not been able to dedicate me more than 5 minutes in the appointment ceremony. And my medals, I always press them to my chest as I revive that high honor before going to the American consulate in the Maldives to start my workday. The United Conference of Catholic Bishops, with a long conservative tradition, decided to celebrate the election of an American pope, Pope Leo XIV, with an invitation to the brethren to return to the Church with a campaign named Time to Return to God. The core of the campaign is to adapt the teachings of Leo XIV to the faith of real Americans. Thus, when the new pope says that you should love the foreigner, the orphan, and the widow, what he really means is that you must send them to Soco in El Salvador. And when he speaks about Jesus' love for the poor, what he really means is that the rich need another tax cut. Besides, the conference ratified previous teachings of the Church that declare that Christianity is not about the Good Samaritan parable, but about celebrating Christmas with gifts before tariffs make them prohibitively expensive, calling Muslims towelheads, deriding gays, celebrating Uncle Bibi's colorful attacks on Gaza, and cutting SNAP and Medicaid. Senate Minority Leader Schumer presented his new plan, Playing Dead to Win, which will replace his confusion strategy. Considered by DNC Chair Ken Martin as too aggressive, the confusion strategy led to Schumer's vote in Congress for the continuing resolution that gave him polemic powers over Congress's appropriations, and to the strong letter he sent to President Trump. All these extreme measures had become a distraction to our mission of taking Rachel Zegler's Snow White to the first spot on Disney+. How is the Harris-Biden ticket going to face the voters in 2028 if we can't get at least that? Asked Chair Martin rhetorically. Ken is right, declared Senator Schumer. When voters at last understand that Trump is not cool, they will come back to us and demand that we ask their pronouns. The U.S. Army is planning a parade for Trump's birthday and, incidentally, for its own anniversary. President Trump will be celebrating his 79th birthday while the Army will celebrate 250 years since its creation. Since this is the first event of its type on American soil, and following the advice of Russian President Vladimir Putin, President Trump's personal friend, the parade will count with Russian weapons and the participation of Russian soldiers and officers who will come to train their American counterparts in the details of an event of such magnitude. The training involves the presence of the Russian army in American bases and the Pentagon for an indefinite period, before and after the parade, to make sure the event meets President Trump's expectations. Asked by American media about the costs, President Trump declared that he had already decided cuts to Social Security and Medicare to make sure the parade costs would not affect the deficit. Justin McCall, 28, from Florida, accidentally shot himself in the leg while he tried to steal a vehicle using a gun. The accidental discharge forced McCall to plead to his victim for help to take him to the nearest hospital, where he was arrested and taken to Okaloosa County's sheriff's office. Because of his large criminal record, his recidivism in car robbery, and the use of a gun and intimidation, McCall faced a condemn of at least 20 years according to Florida law. Yet, McCall decided to join the National Rifle Association, which advocated for the inmate, assigned him a lawyer, and got his sentence reduced to 6 months of community service. Besides, as the reason alleged by the defense was that Florida had not protected McCall's Second Amendment for not providing him with safe use of guns training, the defendant will have to prove that he has satisfactorily completed such training. Moreover, just as in other cases since January 6, the defendant joined the Republican Party and declared himself a patriot. I am doing that as an insurance policy. If I am caught in my next job, I will always be able to allege that, like the patriots of January 6, I was motivated by my deeply held religious beliefs. Those NRA lawyers are real good, man, added McCall after his release.
This has been the news of this hour. Sponsored by Church of the Holy Redeemer's Power in the Spirit. Have you accepted Jesus Christ as your personal Savior? Did you vote for Trump in 2016 and then in 2020? This is the right church for you. If so, Church of the Holy Redeemer's Power in the Spirit is the only Christian church that can promise you in the Lord to have 72 virgins in heaven for only a donation of $50 a month. You will have access to those 72 virgins in heaven. For an additional $25, you will be allowed to replace 10 of them, and for $100, Heaven Premium, you will be allowed to choose them for yourself. Guaranteed, if you're not satisfied with those 72 virgins after you die, full refund of your money. We accept Visa, MasterCard, American Express, and Discover.